friends, it's that time of year again. Time for me, some random lady, to list her top 10 games of the year. 2024 was a bit of a weird year for me with some very high highs, but quite a few letdowns for me personally. I was so let down by some games that I was looking forward to that I honestly didn't even end up playing as many games as I normally would have. That's how bummed I got. But I luckily still played enough good ones to make a solid, albeit slightly weird kind of list. Before I get started, I just want to put out a gentle reminder that there might be some minor spoilers for any of the games that are listed here, so if you do want to avoid that for any of them, you can check the description for timestamps and go ahead and jump on to the next game. I'll be avoiding any major spoilers, so no worries there, but I know some people don't want to know anything at all about games that they're looking forward to playing, so that option is there if you need it. On the screen right now, you'll see a collage of cover art of all of the new release games that I played this year, no matter for how long. I also played a lot of stuff out of my backlog this year, but for this video, we're just focusing on new releases. So with all that out of the way, let's get right into this year's list. Starting out this year's list at number 10 is the game Until Then. Until Then is a visual novel set in a fictional city in the Philippines after a global catastrophe has occurred. It has really beautiful pixel art, a good sense of humor, although sometimes a little corny, and a pretty emotional story. All of which, those things are always going to draw me in. I do need to throw out the disclaimer that I actually didn't fully finish this game, which might be a trend you'll notice in the bottom half of this top 10 list, but I got far enough into it where I feel like I could still fairly include it in the rankings. I think the story in this game is solid, if not sometimes a little heavy on the tropes, and I was surprised at how in-depth you can get with some of the elements in this game, like as far as being able to do deep dives into the comment section of this like fake social media post that exists on your phone. I also think it has really nice music, the emotional beats all hit for me, but for some reason there was something that kind of just nagged at me in this game. I know this might seem like kind of an odd critique, but what really held me back from finishing this game was the sound effects. This is an indie game, so I definitely want to give it some grace. I understand with smaller teams, some of this stuff can be harder, but there are parts of the game, particularly if you've played it, the part where you're at the carnival, where the sound effect track just loops in the background, and the loops are so short. So you're just standing in this carnival hearing people go by on like a roller coaster screaming every 15 seconds. And I know this is definitely a personal thing, but I just cannot handle repetitive noises like that. So for parts of the game, I was straight up muting it. Even though it has nice music, these sound effect things were causing me to mute the entire game. Still, if you don't think that would be a deal breaker for you and you really like an emotional story game, then I would say Until Then is definitely worth checking out. It's also a really cool way to learn about culture in the Philippines, which is something I didn't know a ton about. It is set back further in time. It's not 2024, it's like the early 2000s. And I do think it's always fruitful to play games that highlight other cultures, especially ones that you don't know a lot about. And this is a great opportunity to do so. So I would encourage you to check it out. Next on this year's list feels a little bit like cheating to put it on the list because it's technically 50 games, but at number 9 we have UFO 50. UFO 50 is a compilation of a bunch of smaller games presented as if they were made for a fictional series of consoles by a fake company called UFO Soft. It comes with 50 games across almost any genre you can think of, so there's really something in here for anybody. I've barely even scratched the surface of what's available, and I still had such a fun time with what I've played already. My personal highlights from what I've tried are Magic Garden, a game that's sort of like a mix between Snake and Flicky if you've played either of those. Paint Chase, which is a maze game where you try and paint the most territory, sort of like Splatoon. And then Pin Golf, which is a game that I am absolutely garbage at, but it's a mix between golf and pinball. It's pretty fun. Again, I'm terrible at it, so you won't even see any footage because I didn't want to embarrass myself by putting it in here, but it is a pretty fun game. There's sincerely so much stuff to play in UFO 50 that I couldn't possibly talk about it all, even if I had played all of them. Not every game is going to be for you. Certainly not every game in here is for me, but I'd be shocked if you couldn't find something in there that you would find fun. There is literally everything in it. There's even an RPG. A fully fleshed out RPG is in this game. Definitely check this game out if you like retro style games, if you like challenging yourself, or if you just want fun little time killers. That's sort of what I've been using it as, something to just pass the time when I want to play something non-committal. If you're really into challenges, I would say this is also a great game to check out. Most of the games have high scores, leaderboards, things like that. There's really something in it for everybody, and it's not too expensive, so I definitely would recommend checking UFO 50 out if you're interested. Continuing the trend of games I didn't actually finish but think really highly of, at number 8 is the game Ultros. Ultros is a Metroidvania where you're inside stick with me here, a giant space uterus, yes, you heard that right, and you're stuck in a loop trying to figure out why you're there and how to get out. First and foremost, this game is really aesthetically beautiful. If nothing else, it's really great to look at. It also controls really well, which I find to be pretty much the most important thing in a Metroidvania, personally. I will admit, though, that this game took about an hour or so to really click for me. I was sort of like, what are we doing here? It's kind of dragging. Skill building, it seems really limited. But what really made my opinion of it shoot up is when I hit my first time loop and then realized that that is a key mechanic of the game. When the loop resets, you lose all of your learned skills, but eventually you get a mechanic that lets you keep certain skills, and that really opens the map up in different ways as you go on, and you were able to retain more and more skills. I thought this was a really cool twist. It's not something that I personally have seen in a Metroidvania before, and it helped keep me pretty engaged. This was a really fun one to pick up on my Steam Deck, but unfortunately life just got in the way and I hit that point where I accidentally forgot a lot of the controls, and now if I go back to it, I'm gonna have to sit and like relearn what I knew, and that's what's kept me from going back to it. Even when I sat down to record gameplay footage for this video, I was like, man, I really have to go back to this game. It's really fun, it's really snappy, I'm very intrigued about what's going on plot wise. I think it's really fun, and I personally am going to try and make an effort to go back to finish it, and that's why I cared enough to put it on this list, even though I haven't finished it yet. I think if you're looking for a really fun and unique Metroidvania, definitely give Ultros a look. Up next at number 7 is Fields of Mystria. Fields of Mystria is a farming simulator with RPG elements, and even though it's still in early access, which is definitely a disclaimer I need to put out there, I think it's already worth its $14 price point. There are games out there with far less charging far more. Not only are there no real technical issues that I personally have run into, but I think it's already pretty fleshed out with mechanics for a game that's in early access. One thing to know about me is that Stardew Valley is one of my favorite games of all time. I love Stardew Valley so much that it's pretty much ruined the entire farming sim genre for me, unfortunately. That sucks, because I do really like farming sims, but anytime I go to play one now, I inevitably just end up thinking, I'd rather be playing Stardew Valley. I get the urge, I stop playing whatever it was that I was playing, and I start a new Stardew Valley farm. Fields of Mystria is so far the only farming game in years, since like 2016, that didn't have me immediately make a U-turn back to Pelican Town. All of the NPCs in Fields of Mystria, both the romanceable ones and the non-romanceable ones, are all likable. They're really fleshed out. They have a lot of really unique dialogue lines. It's fun and simple to play, and it even has a lot of quality of life changes over Stardew, such as being able to see where the hell anybody is on the map at a given time, an indicator as to whether or not items need to be donated to the museum or not. There's just all sorts of stuff that when you come across it, you'll be like, wow, I always wished that in Stardew I didn't have to deal with this minor inconvenience. And that's no knock on Stardew Valley. It's a one-man show, and what Concerned Ape has given us with Stardew Valley is beyond amazing for its value. But it is just nice that in Fields of Mystria there's a lot of things that are like, oh wow, I don't have to like go all the way back and do this little deposit or something like that. It's something that as you play it, you will come across them and be like, wow, I wish that I had that in Stardew without requiring mods. You know what I mean? Dialogue with the characters doesn't ever really feel repetitive to me, and there's a system that lets you level up the town, which feels really rewarding and incentivizes you to keep doing things. Again, this is in early access, which I know for some people is going to be a deal breaker, and I completely understand if that's the case. I am normally one of those people, but if you don't mind giving a game an early chance, this is one of the best quality early access games that I can remember trying. I am personally holding off playing any more until 1.0 just because I would really like to binge it, but it's still really good and promising. It's a really welcome entry in the farm sim genre for me. Ranked number 6 this year is Persona 3 Reload. Persona 3 Reload now officially holds the title of the first and only Atlas RPG that I've actually completed besides Rhapsody, a musical adventure, which everybody should play, despite having dumped significant hours into both 4 and 5. I'll own up to the fact that the differentiator for me here was the fact that I went ahead and just slapped this game on easy mode, but it made such a huge difference. I'd never played any version of Persona 3 before this, but this game looked great for a remake, especially for a remake of a game from like the aughts. So I really wanted to play it, but I didn't feel like grinding. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put it on easy. And honestly, game changer. Highly recommend the same thing if you like Persona games, but you're just like, I don't have 120 hours because I'm an adult now with a career that takes up a lot of my time and social obligations and, you know, all the reasons that we don't have as many hours in the day to just play games anymore, unfortunately. If you've ever played a Persona game, it's the same general idea. Teenagers go to school during the day, but by night, they enter some other dimension and channel their personas to defeat some adult-related evil. It's got fun combat, a fantastic soundtrack, and it's equal parts funny and cringe-inducing with its moments, all of the Persona staples. I will say that some of the content in this game has definitely aged poorly, such as the fact that to even summon their persona, the characters have to point a gun at themselves and then pull the trigger because they need to feel the imminence of death or something insane like that. Something that makes you go, how did anybody ever look at that and go, yep, greenlit, that's what we're making the game. That's what we're making the core of the game. There's also some sexualization of the female characters that I personally am not a fan of, but I know to expect that when I step into anything anime adjacent. I know everything about me, if you know me at all, gives an indication that I would like anime, but for that reason, I don't really love anime. So whenever it gets into heavy anime tropes, I get a little like, oh, shut up, game, stop doing that. And there's definitely quite a few moments like that in this game. So be wary if you feel the same sentiment. I think what set this Persona aside for me, though, and actually motivated me to finish it, is that I just really liked the characters. In Persona 4, I can't stand Chie, and in 5, I can't stand Ryuji, but in 3, I pretty much liked everybody. Junpei definitely runs close to that same archetype as Chie and Ryuji, but he stayed mostly pretty tolerable for me. The game did manage to get some tears out of me at one point, and it also gave me a new top contender among my favorite video game characters in Koromaru, a dog who carries a blade in his mouth. He's the best boy, and I was so worried that something bad would happen to him, and it never did. Long live Koromaru. I already have a plushie of him. I truly am delighted to have Koromaru in my life. I love Koromaru. I'm not sure if I'd feel the same way about this game if I had played it on normal difficulty, because it does get a little long near the end, even with the easy difficulty, but I still looked forward to playing it. I really blasted through it, even though it's a long game, and I'm happy that I saw it through to the end. Kicking off the top half of this year's list at number 5 is Crow Country. Crow Country pays homage to a particular type of game that I absolutely positively did not play growing up. Even with that in mind, I still loved it. In Crow Country, you play as a young woman who's investigating an old abandoned theme park, the titular Crow Country, looking for its missing owner. Things start to get wacky and spooky pretty much right off the bat, and you slowly uncover the mystery surrounding the park and its owner. This game definitely goes back to basics not only graphically, but also with its controls and its puzzles. I actually busted out a notebook for this game to keep track of the hints and the solutions for puzzles, and I would highly recommend doing the same if you play it. There's a lot of environmental storytelling and clues going on, and it's a lot easier if you just have somewhere to keep track of those. Unless your mind is still trapped, then I guess just do it that way. The gun controls in this game are my only big complaint. They're very wonky, which I get is somewhat the point because of what it's doing as a game, but it can still be frustrating in action. As a certified weenie, I did get jump scared quite a bit while playing this, but I just thought it was so interesting and charming that it kept me playing anyway. I'm also confident that this game is probably full of references to the games that inspired it, and I probably missed all of those. Even still, that's a testament to the fact that this game doesn't lean on those things, and it's instead a great game in its own right. Its runtime is a smidge short, which is something to keep in mind, but there is also the option to go back and solve additional puzzles, which I didn't do, so that might add some bang to your buck if you like that sort of thing. The atmosphere and story of this story are really great, and I'd highly recommend checking it out if you've been on the fence. Ranked 4th this year is the game Emio, the Smiling Man. This is a brand new entry in the Famicom Detective Club series, which are visual novels that unexpectedly got remakes in 2021. Emio uses a slightly improved upon engine, but largely functions the same as those 2021 remakes if you've played those. I'm gonna say up front that Emio is a very dark story, so if you're sensitive to certain types of content, you should absolutely look it up before diving into it. I personally won't be diving too deep into the details of it here, but I did just still want to throw out that warning because I know everybody's different with that sort of thing. In Emio, you're a young detective who's helping to investigate the murder of a teenager who was found with a paper bag over his head. With that paper bag, also a smiley face drawn on it, thus the Smiling Man. There's a local urban legend about this paper bag, and you kind of start to put things together and figure things out from there. That's what kicks off your investigation. I personally played Emio all in one day, so it's safe to say that I found the story pretty engaging. I don't want to go too deep into the details of the story because I feel like with story games like this, like visual novels, that's pretty much the whole point. There's not a lot much else to talk about, but I don't want to spoil it for you. People were really hyping up this game as scary, and I do think it does have a couple of spooky-ish parts, but as I mentioned, as a certified weenie, I would honestly consider this game more disturbing than I would say it is scary. I do still think it's worthy of the horror label, but I'd say it's more in line with like the first half of Hereditary than the last half, if you catch my drift, if that means anything to you. The mystery is intriguing and the characters are all interesting, but the gameplay falls into the same rut as the previous Famicom Detective Club games, where sometimes it wants you to ask things in such a specific order that it can start to get a little bit tedious. I will also say that the first place where the game ends left me kind of thinking, oh, all right, well, I guess that's it then. That's a lot of loose ties. But the epilogue really brings it together. So be sure that if you play this, that you also play the epilogue. But on top of that, also be sure that you heed the content warning that the epilogue gives you. It's very necessary. It makes a lot of sense that they gave it to you. The game definitely earned its M rating with that epilogue. I know visual novels aren't for everyone, but if they happen to be for you, I think MEO is a really solid, almost I would say a can't miss entry. This year's third place game is a game that I'm terrible at, but I love nonetheless. Balatro. If you managed to miss out on the hype surrounding Balatro this year, it's a roguelike deck building game where you play poker, sort of. It's like poker, but the main goal here is to rack up points by using cards that modify the rules of the game, they modify your deck, multiply your score, etc, etc. This game can get really crazy when you're great at it, but even when you're shitty at it, like me, it's still so addicting. It's so fun. The gameplay loop is so simple, it's just... I could just play it forever, I feel like. To give you some context, I almost never play games on my phone. I absolutely hate using my phone for anything other than like texting and social media. Like that to me is what a phone is for. I don't play games on my phone, but I paid actual real life money to have a copy of Balatro on my phone. It's the perfect game to play on the plane or the bus, so I've been dumping serious time into it whenever I take either of those modes of transportation. If you're not into poker or you haven't played it before, don't let that intimidate you. You really only need to know the basic hand types, and you'll catch on to those quite quickly. As you continue to play it, you'll get the hang of things more, and eventually you're going to be stacking those insane scores that I keep getting TikToks of and make me feel bad about myself when I look at my top score. I wish that there was more I could say about it, but the truth is that although it can get really complex with strategies and stuff like that, at its core, the game itself is pretty simple to describe. I really recommend trying it out, especially if you commute and you need something to play on the go. I think it's the perfect on-the-go game. I think it's accessible to everybody. You don't need to know about poker. I've heard a few people be like, oh, I don't play poker, and so I don't think it's for me. It's like, you just need to understand. If you've played Yahtzee, you could play Balatro. And I bet you've played Yahtzee, and I bet you like Yahtzee, so play Balatro. Second place this year goes to Astrobot. I'm behind schedule in making this year's video, so I can tell you that this game already won Game of the Year at the Game Awards in 2024, which I think is fully deserved. Astrobot is a 3D platformer on PlayStation 5, and I don't think I could name a single thing that I think is wrong with it. If you've ever played the PS5 tech demo game Astro's Playroom, this game is more of that, but it's improved upon and iterated upon. You go to various themed worlds, collect puzzle pieces, PS5 parts, and other Astrobots. Among these bots are tons of iconic PlayStation characters, which I won't spoil for you, but just know that there's all sorts of characters in the mix, and a lot of them are probably ones you didn't expect that you would see in this. The controls are snappy, it feels so great to play. There's different gimmicks through items in each world that make combat or traversal different, and that saves it from getting too redundant. There's optional challenge courses for anybody who likes a little bit of a challenge, but even those aren't too hard. They just recently added a speedrun mode and some free DLC. I'll be honest, again, when I went to record gameplay footage for this, I played an extra hour after I was done capturing footage because I wanted to play the new DLC, and it was really fun and free. The closest game that I think I could compare this one to is maybe Super Mario Galaxy. I thought multiple times while I was playing Astrobot how much it was reminding me of Galaxy, and that's one of the only Mario games that I could say that I really love. The music is cute, the graphics are great, everything seriously so great. I loved this game so much. I also think that a game like this was very needed, and I hope that the fact that it won Game of the Year signals to other companies to make more games like this. As much as I love big RPGs, I love adventures, and I have nothing against extra challenging games, I feel like gaming has sort of hit this spot where it feels like everything has to be this big epic fantasy, or it has to be ultra difficult, or else it's not going to be respected. I think that games like this appeal to all ages, all skill levels, and honestly, games like this that are just pure fun desperately need to make a comeback, and I really, really hope that we see more of it. I really loved my time with Astrobot. I would highly encourage you to check it out if you're able. Before we get to the top game of the year, as usual, I've got to name drop some of my honorable mentions. The first of these is web fishing. Web fishing is basically just the fishing mechanic from Animal Crossing made into its own game. It's really fun, but it is pretty basic, and I think that it leans a lot on the socialization aspect in it. There is chat, you can join people's lobbies, stuff like that. Still, it's only $5, it's very cute and fun, so I really think that it's worth your time. Next is Metaphor Refantasio. This game would likely have made the main list if I had played more of it, but unfortunately, as you know, I also played Persona 3 this year, and I just didn't have it in me to crank out 2 Atlas RPGs in 1 year. I got about 10 hours into this, and I loved what I've played so far, and I do intend to go back to it at some point, but I just didn't have it in me, so unfortunately, it didn't make it in time for this year's list. My final honorable mention is Buckshot Roulette. This game is Russian roulette, but it's got some strategy and a little bit of spookiness attached to it. The only thing about it is that it gets a little repetitive once you've gotten the hang of it. It is only $3 though, so again, this is one that I think is absolutely worth your time. It's a fun little time killer game if you need something to fill in the gaps. And finally, my number 1 game of the year, to probably nobody's surprise, is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. For context, I liked but did not love Remake, and I was actually pretty apprehensive going into Rebirth because of that. My expectations were absolutely exceeded. I loved Rebirth. I wasn't somebody who had any qualms with them potentially changing story beats in the new trilogy, but I honestly didn't have a lot of faith in them doing new things well. And I think because of that, I was very worried about how they'd handle all of the outright silly stuff that exists in the original Final Fantasy VII. All that being said, I think they nailed it. I think they nailed the vibe entirely in Rebirth. There's just so much whimsy, so much silliness, but the serious moments also still hit just as nicely. In my opinion, I think they perfectly nailed the vibe of the original Final Fantasy VII while still adding things that were new, but they didn't feel like they took away from anything in the original. My number 1 complaint about Remake was that the combat always felt like you had to have exactly the right materia equipped for each battle, and if you happened to get into a big battle and not have the exact one that you needed, it felt like an absolute slog. I think that Rebirth addresses this really well by giving each character access to elemental skills to compensate for these situations, which means you're never stuck in a position where you can't stagger an enemy and you're just stuck chipping away at them for like an hour. The synergy skill system from the Intermission DLC also made its way into Rebirth, and I really just think that it makes things so much more fun to play. The combat in Rebirth just clicked for me, and I think that every playable character is fun in their own regard. Even Barrett and Aerith, who were 2 characters that I did not enjoy playing as at all in Remake. There are a couple of pacing issues here and there, especially when it comes to letting big moments breathe. The most egregious of these, for me, was right after the big finale of Dine's story arc. You're thrown right into a battle with Palmer, who is literally slapping his butt at you and taunting you, and it came so soon after the Dine stuff that there were literally still tears in my eyes as Palmer was slapping his butt, and I was just like, why? Game, you didn't need, this is a new battle, this didn't exist, why did you have to put this right here? There's also a similar issue, not as silly, but just another issue where it doesn't let a moment breathe right at the tail end of the Cosmo Canyon dungeon, which is not only my favorite scene in the original game, but one of my all-time favorite gaming scenes ever, so that was a little bit of a bummer. But honestly, I feel like these are nitpicks that I have, and the stuff that I enjoyed in the game far outweighed these nitpicks. I personally love collecting and I love mini games, and this game is stuffed to the brim with them. Even though I think all of the mini games are fun for the most part, I could definitely see how they wouldn't be for everybody. So if you're not a fan of mini games, it's definitely something that you should be aware of. I personally absolutely love the new card game Queen's Blood, and I really desperately hope that they make a standalone version ASAP. The music is amazing. I got to go to a Distant Worlds concert where they only played Rebirth songs, and it was phenomenal. Each character in this game gets their own time to shine, and I think they're all great. Even, well, I was gonna say even Kate Sith, but I've been a longtime Kate Sith defender, but I think other people have come around to him now too. I honestly could yap on and on about all the things that I love in this game, but in the interest of time and not spoiling things for people who may not have played or finished it, I guess I can wrap it up. But if you were iffy on the remake, I'd say to still give Rebirth a try. I personally was a strong doubter. I did not have a lot of faith and a lot of belief, but this was the easiest pick for my game of the year in quite some time. I truly had so much fun playing it. I encourage you to play it as well. I hope you love it. If you don't, that's fine. We can still be friends. I understand. That's going to do it for this year's top 10 list. I really appreciate you sticking it out and joining me for this year's recap. If you're interested at all, you can also find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Kreestin, where I do occasional live streams, and I've got my other socials listed in the description below as well. Here's hoping to a more fruitful year of games for me in 2025, and I would personally love to hear what your top games are for the year as well. Until then, not the game, just the phrase. Thanks again, and I'll see you next year.